simplify these very technical details and just show us what we care about, which is typically a page that looks a little something like this. So that's in a little more detail how the internet works and how the web works. Any questions? All right, so if we peel back this layer now of Google, let me go up here. Let me go to View, Page Source, which is not there. Let me go here and click View Page Source. And what you will see is how Google implemented their website. And in here is a little something called HTML and a lot of something called JavaScript, both of which you will be speaking in just a little bit's time. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break here, and we'll come back and start writing some HTML. All right, we are back. So let us learn how to make something like this. So how do you actually start putting web pages on the internet? Well, thus far, all of our stories have assumed that there's a browser, a client, and that's easy because almost all of us have that either right now or back in your room. But the server is a little less obvious how you go about doing this. Well, it turns out that all this time, you've been using the CS50 appliance for C programming and to write your code and for other purposes, but it itself is pre-configured to be a server. Now, the appliance is only so useful because when you're on campus and you're using wireless, your IP address is actually changing pretty often. So even though your laptop has a server, a web server on it, even though we haven't used it up until today, it's not really going to be accessible by anyone else on the internet because they don't know your IP address. Your appliance also does not have a human-friendly name like google.com. And also, for security purposes, we've configured the appliance's server to not be accessible on the internet unless you throw some switch, so to speak, to actually let the outside world have access. But this is the funny thing. Like, a server on the internet does not need to be some mainframe computer that takes up part of a room. It doesn't even need to be a server in a rack of servers. Rather, it can literally be our own laptops. People have even hacked things like the Xbox and the PS3 to be web servers because all you need to run a server is just a computer. And you need to put the right software on it. And the software is just called web server software. So even though we call physical devices typically servers, that's fine. But it's really the software that's the server, the thing that's like a waiter in a restaurant actually serving up information. And there's web servers, there's mail servers, there's instant messaging servers, Skype servers. There's a whole bunch of servers or services on the internet, and you just need the right software. And so we already have that. So let me go over to the appliance here. I'm going to go ahead and close Firefox and just get to the point of having my terminal window open here. So jharvard at appliance. Well, when you log into a terminal window in the appliance, you can usually type ls and see what you have in your home directory. You have desktop by default, and you also have source. I have a source directory from today, but we need a special directory. Almost always, if you have the appliance in this case, or if you have an account on a commercial web server that you can pay $5 a month, $20 a month for, you generally have a username and password that you can use to connect to the server. Now, even though in the case of the appliance, you don't really need to connect to it. You just need to double-click it, and it opens, and there you are. It turns out that we can also connect to the appliance as though it's some random server on the internet from our own Mac or PC. So we'll see that in a moment. But first, let's do this. I'm going to go ahead into my home directory where I am by default, and I'm going to type this command, mk for make directory, and then I'm going to make a special directory called public_html, all lowercase, no spaces, and then I'm going to hit enter. If I really wanted to, or if I wasn't comfortable at the command line, I could also go to my home directory. I could, for instance, go to File. I could go Create Folder and do the exact same thing. But by now, odds are you're pretty comfortable using the blinking prompt at the terminal window. But there it is. Public HTML, there's nothing in it. So let's go back to the terminal window and see what we can do with that. I'm going to go into public HTML with CD, as you've done before. I'm going to hit enter, type ls, and indeed nothing's there. So let's do this. I'm going to open up gedit, where even though you usually double-click its icon, you can also type its name in all lowercase. And I'm going to create a special file called index.html. All lowercase, no spaces, enter. That's going to go ahead and prompt gedit to open. And notice in its title bar, it's pointing out that you are inside of your public HTML directory. And that's good, because I want this file to end up in that directory specifically. I'm going to go ahead now and just do the following. I'm going to do open bracket, exclamation point, doc type in all caps, HTML in lowercase, and that's it. So this term, we're using a version of HTML called HTML5. It's sort of the latest and greatest, even though it's not quite a fully adopted standard. These technologies, as you might have gathered, are kind of a moving target. Even though C, as we know it, has been the same since 1999, HTML changes by the month, by the year. And so we'll focus particularly on the fundamentals over the next few weeks and less on sort of the temporal aspects. But this very first line that I typed in a file called index.html is just a clue to the browser with which I'm going to open this file that, hey, this is HTML. It's not sufficient, unfortunately, that just the file name ends in .html. You have to be a little more pedantic and at the top of the file say doctype HTML. And then I can proceed to do the following. It turns out that every web page on the internet is composed of what we'll call tags. A tag is something that has an open bracket and a close bracket. And so this is, and it's unfortunate that this looks the same. What we just typed is not a tag. It's a special case. But this is a tag. Open bracket, HTML, close bracket. And then I'm going to do the opposite, so to speak, here. So every web page starts with open bracket HTML, close bracket, and then ends with the opposite, where the opposite is the same word with a / inside of the brackets. So you can really think of this quite simply as this means here comes a web page. That's the end of the web page. These are like directives that are just telling the browser so straightforwardly, do this, don't do this. Or here's this, here's not this. They're kind of reversing each other's effects. Now, every web page has two main parts. One is called the head of a web page. And I'm going to preemptively create the open part and the closed part, and then the body. And notice, too, just like we did in C, I'm trying to be a little nitpicky with my indentation and white space. I'm trying to keep it looking clean, even though, as we saw from Google, that was a mess. The browsers don't care what it looks like, but for humans, it's a good thing. And if we have as much traffic as Google does, where every byte or white space counts, well, then we can resort to that as well. But for now, this is definitely good style. Unfortunately, this is a very uninteresting web page. There's a placeholder for the head of it. There's a placeholder for the body of it, but nothing more. So for now, the only thing we're going to put into the head is going to be a title tag. So I'm going to go ahead and open title tag and then close title tag. But for the first time, I'm now going to actually put in some content. Hello, comma, world, for instance. So that's it for title. And then down here, hello, comma, world, again. And so that's it for now. So I have a title tag in the head. The head is in HTML. But I also have a body tag that's inside of HTML as well, but not inside head. So notice the indentation. Just like with curly braces and parentheses in C, similarly do we have a nice symmetry here, both aesthetically and also logically with our tags. So what's this going to mean? Well, in a nutshell, when you open up a browser and you go to a page here, the thing that appears usually in the title bar, that's the head, and specifically the title. And everything that appears down below from the below all of the buttons and whatnot, that's the body. So the body is really 99% of a web page. So now let me go back to this file. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I saved it with File, Save, or Control S. And that's it. So this is all the web page is. Indeed, an uninteresting web page, but it's just a text file. Just like C programs are text files, so is a web page a text file. But the thing with a web page is you don't compile it. This is literally what's going to get sent to the browser. HTML is what's called an interpreted language, which means you don't convert it to zeros and ones. Rather, you just send it to a machine. And the machine then reads it top to bottom, left to right. So the takeaway here immediately is that if you're at all concerned for your intellectual property, it doesn't matter. Like, it's out there. When you write web pages, anyone on the internet can see your HTML. But the reality is HTML is not an interesting language. It's kind of fun to play with it first, and we're going to use it quite a bit to make more interesting things. But it's just static markup. It's entirely aesthetic. It's not a programming language because there's no notion of functions or loops or conditions. All there is do this, don't do this. And so we'll see a few more examples of that. So now let's go ahead and open this. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Firefox. And as promised, the appliance itself is a server, which means it's listening for connections from browsers and from other things on the internet. So I'm going to go up to the address bar, and I'm going to open my own web page. I'm going to go to http://localhost. So I'm specifically typing localhost because that's the nickname. That's like the local google.com name for my own appliance, / and then this is the convention. Because we're currently using a jharvard account, if I literally type ~jharvard, I'm going to have a URL right now that looks like this. So definitely not good for the branding of my website. No one's going to remember this. And the tilde is hard to find even on some keyboards. But this is the convention. Typically, when you, little old you, has an account on a server, and that server is a web server, you can access your pages at a URL that looks like this. As an aside, you all probably have FAS accounts back from problem set 0, even though we haven't used them. But that means you actually have access to www.people.fas.harvard.edu/tilde username, where username is your own FAS username. So that's where Frogman and my UC campaign used to live, at crazy long URLs like that. I mean, just imagine trying to write that on a poster back in the day. It's just no one visited my website is the point of this story. So let's hit enter and see what my web page looks like. Enter. Damn it. So there's a problem. And there's that number. I see it in the title and in the tab, 403 forbidden. So this has something to do with permissions. And this is actually a good thing. It's a mistake on my part, but it's a good thing in that clearly by default, when I create files on the internet, they're not accessible to the whole world until I tell the world, now you may look at these files. So I have to actually run a new command. I have to do a couple of things. First, let me go back to my home directory by typing cd. And then I'm going to go ahead and do ls-l. And this gives me the long listing. And you've done this before for a problem set. Now, notice for public HTML, I have, and desktop, notice that they just say this, drwx hyphen, 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 hyphen. What does all of that actually mean? Well, let me go ahead and just open up real fast a text editor, just so I have some place to type. And let me just repeat that. So the public HTML directory currently looks like this, hyphen, 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 hyphen. These are its so-called permissions. Now, what does this mean? There is always the same number of characters here. D just means directory, and it's public HTML is a directory. We made it ourselves. And just take a guess. What does R stand for? Read. W. Write. X. Executable. So what do these mean in the context of a directory? Well, right here, I'm going to say this is me. And this is all over here. And I'm just going to put a question mark for now as to these middle three. And let me separate them just a little bit to make this a little more clear as to what represents what. If I just add some white space here, these three triples of hyphens or letters represent permissions for three different people. Me is the one on the left. So me, I have read, write, and executability permission for this directory. What does that mean? Read means you can see the contents. Write means you can change the contents. Executable means you can double click the folder or CD into it. You can actually get into it. It doesn't mean execute like run. It means you can actually open it and go inside in the first place. As an aside, the middle three refer to what's called a group. If you've ever poked around on your appliance, you might know that John Harvard is always associated with students somehow. Well, that's the group that you're in, so to speak. But for now, we'll just pretty much ignore that one, because the interesting one is on the right-hand side. Hyphen, hyphen, hyphen means all. The rest of the internet has no permissions whatsoever. There's no R, there's no W, there's no X, which means everybody else on the internet is not going to be able to touch this directory at all. But this is a problem, because if I want this directory to be on the internet, I need to give the world a few permissions. And the most important one is executability. Minimally, if I have web files in here, my HTML is in this directory, surely the world has to be able to get into this directory somehow. So I can use a new command for that called chmod for change mode. And I can simply type change mode, chmod, A for all, plus X, so all plus executability. And then I just mentioned the name of the directory. Enter. And now if I do ls-l again, notice what's changed. Public HTML is still read, write, execute for me, but also execute for everyone else, as well as my group. But again, I'm going to wave my hand at the group detail. The last one is what's really important. So let's now reload. Hopefully I've fixed all my problems. I'm going to click reload. Still forbidden. So who might be the culprit now? Yeah, what about index.html? Let's go in there. So cd public HTML. Let me type ls-l. And this looks OK. It looks like my file was created with readability privileges for everyone. All right, because that's how I configured it in advance. But if I go here, let me do one other command. I hit cd to go back to my home directory. ls-al, there's a whole bunch of stuff. It turns out inside of your home directories, there's all of these dot files, files that literally begin with a period. And by convention in Linux, anything that starts with a dot, Mac OS 2, is hidden.